Hi there! If you've ever wondered whether international economics is something for you, or if you would like to know more about the economics involved in Brexit, you clicked on the right video.
Brexit? Well, at least the intro is on point. But what is this video about exactly?
In this clip, you will get an insight into the theory and rhetoric used in international economics by looking at the case study of Brexit. In fact, the Brexit case study is an ideal real-life situation to which much of the theory discussed in international economics can be applied. You will find that many of the issues addressed are an extension of the issues discussed in introductory economic classes. In this episode, we specifically focus on the international trade of UK goods, services and capital.
Okay, you still got my attention, but what exactly is this Brexit you're talking about?
On the 23rd of June last year, the UK held an indicative referendum on its membership of the European Union. The most important motivations to leave were to be more independent, to restore national identity, and control migration flows in the United Kingdom. The leave option won by a small margin, which led to the resignation of Cameron, and Theresa May became the new Prime Minister. A period with uncertainty and a lot of negotiations followed, until the vote to leave the EU was ratified when Theresa May triggered Article 50 of the EU Treaty on the 29th of March 2017. The article outlines the procedures to be taken upon a country wanting to leave the EU. At this point, there is no way back to the EU for the UK in the coming 2 transitional years.
And how exactly is this linked to international economics?
Well, while delving into the economics involved with Brexit from an international perspective, arguably the most important issue to analyze is the consequence for UK's international trade. A result of the EU's aim to ensure an economic union is that a governance framework exists to monitor, prevent, and correct problematic economic trends that could weaken national economies or negatively affect fellow member states.
So you are saying that to a large extent the economic policies of the member states are centralized in an EU framework?
Exactly, and this framework, if anything, provides security and stability to the countries taking part. Naturally then, one can expect international trade flows to change upon an economically prominent country such as the UK planning to leave the EU. In order to grasp the potential effects of Brexit on UK's international trade, we will touch upon the following concepts. We will talk about the balance of payments, which is largely made up out of the current account and the financial account. We will touch upon the importance of market expectations and model its consequences in an RS-RD model. We will also look at the effect of Brexit on foreign direct investment, in which exchange rates play a major role.
Is this the point where you're overloading me with abstract theory? Because then I'm out of here.
Not quite. We will define some of the terms above, but quickly move to their application to UK's international trade flows. All transactions between a country such as the UK and the rest of the world are recorded in a country's balance of payments. The balance of payments is largely made up out of the current account and the financial account. There is one more account in the balance of payments, referred to as the capital account, but this is of little importance for now. Per definition, the current account involves transactions from exported and imported goods and services, while international sales or purchases of assets appear in a financial account. An asset is any one of the forms in which wealth can be held, such as money, stocks, factories, or government debt.
So, if I were a foreign investor who buys shares of United Biscuits, a large UK company, this would mean an export of a financial asset on the financial account?
Correct, and it means an influx of money into the UK. Actually, it is important to note that London is one of the leading financial centers of international business and thereby can be seen as a command center for the global economy.
I guess I understand, but what exactly happened when this so-called command center announced it will leave the EU?
Well, after the UK referendum resulted in a vote to leave the European Union, immediately UK exchange rate increased drastically, lowering the value of the pound. When Scotland threatened with a second referendum, the exchange rate increased again, and when Theresa May triggered Article 50, the UK exchange rate was under pressure once more. So without any concrete changes being formulated or implemented, the British economy is already responding. From this observation, we can draw an important implication for real-life international economics. That is, besides planned monetary and fiscal policy, changing expectations by foreign consumers and investors affect cross-border demand directly and instantly. Hence, international economics often distinguishes between market expectations and actual policy implementation.
That is definitely an interesting observation, but I do not quite understand why the market reacted as it does. Why do exchange rates go up every time Brexit-related events are happening?
To answer that question, we need to introduce two models typically used in international economic analyses. The first model deals with the current account and is called the relative supply-relative demand diagram. It depicts the demand and supply of domestic output relative to that of the rest of the world. On the y-axis, we place the real long-run exchange rate of the country in question, and on the x-axis, the relative quantity of domestic output. The relative demand curve is upward sloping, since a higher exchange rate means that the pound is relatively cheaper compared to foreign currencies, and thus UK output-export is relatively cheaper compared to foreign output. Relative supply of output is assumed to be fixed and at full employment level.
And I'm guessing the equilibrium point is where the curves intersect? At least that's the case in the intro to economics.
Yes, you're absolutely right. In the long run, we assume the market to clear, or in other words, we expect full employment output to equal demand. Now, let's see what happened with this RS-RD equilibrium point when Brexit was announced using this model. Remember that demand is instantly affected by changing expectations of consumers and investors. Also, you should know that all countries part of the EU benefit from free movement of goods, services and capital. So when the UK voted to leave the EU on the 23rd of June last year, immediately expectations on future prices of UK output changed. For example, foreign consumers might expect the imposition of trade barriers like import tariffs between the UK and the EU, since the UK likely loses the advantage of tariff-free trade when leaving the EU. Expected relative price for UK output would increase and thus demand would decrease. We can perfectly depict this market reaction on the RS-RD model. On the 23rd of June, the relative demand curve for UK output shifted to the left. This means that at the new equilibrium point, where the market's clear, the pound is expected to depreciate to compensate for the increase in absolute price. The new equilibrium point, therefore, is at a higher expected real exchange rate.
I think I understand. Possible future trade barriers instantly affect the demand by foreign consumers through changing expectations on the price of UK output. An increase in absolute price shifts the RD curve to the left, resulting in a new equilibrium with a higher expected exchange rate. But what about the demand for financial assets, because they are not subject to any trade barriers?
For international trade of assets on the financial account, we use a different model, referred to as the interest parity condition.
And why do we need a different model?
Well, as opposed to the trade of goods and services, where consumers receive the utility of the goods or service consumed in return, investors in assets receive a rate of return on their financial investment over time. Often, this rate of return is referred to as the interest rate on investment. The rate of return on UK assets is inherently related to the UK exchange rate. In order to show how the two are related, we need the interest parity condition, which states that the foreign exchange market is in equilibrium when deposits of all currencies offer the same expected rate of return. The interest parity condition can be modeled by plotting rate of return on domestic and foreign assets as two curves in a graph, with domestic exchange rate on the y-axis and the rates of return on the x-axis. In this model, the return on UK assets is given at a time and independent of exchange rate, since rate of return is expressed in UK currency. Hence the vertical curve. The expected return on foreign assets expressed in domestic currency has a negative relation with domestic exchange rate, since a stronger pound results in a higher expected possible depreciation. Due to this future expected possible depreciation of the pound, your bundle of the foreign assets could be sold for a relatively high amount of pounds again, leading to a large return on your investment of foreign assets. Again, the equilibrium exchange rate is where expected UK asset returns are equal to expected foreign asset returns. For a more in-depth explanation of the interest parity condition, you can click on the link below. Now, if we know that the EU regulatory framework provides security and stability for economies of its member states, we can argue that when the UK voted to leave on the 23rd of June last year, immediately a large part of the feeling of security and stability in the UK vanished. This made it hard for investors to make proper predictions on their rate of return on UK assets. Suddenly, investing in UK assets had become a much more risky business, and thus demand for UK assets plunged. Investors had to consider the increased risk and now expected the worst, a lower rate of return on assets than before.
And let me guess, this means a new equilibrium emerges due to a leftward shift of the return on UK assets?
Yes, and from the graph we can easily see that the new equilibrium results in a higher exchange rate.
So, an unprecedented event like Brexit causes major uncertainty about the rate of return on assets, shifting the rate of return to the left, resulting in a higher exchange rate?
Yes, and in the course International Economics, you will look more thoroughly at these models by means of formulas. The course does involve some calculus, but don't worry, with visual models like the ones I just showed you, it becomes fairly easy. What is interesting to note is that this phenomenon of increasing exchange rates and Brexit occurred several times. When Scotland threatened with a second referendum, the exchange rate increased as well, and when Theresa May gave a worldwide speech on her Brexit plans, or when she triggered Article 50, the UK exchange rate was under pressure once more, proving the reliability of these models.
For sure, this is interesting, but if you were to predict what the future brings for Britain, what would you tell me now?
That is a difficult question to answer, mainly because it depends on the content of the new regulatory framework and the efficiency with which Theresa May, in collaboration with the EU, will put this new framework together. But some things are for sure. High exchange rates will lead to relatively expensive import for the UK and cheap export from the UK for the rest of the world. And in case import tariffs in trade between the UK and the EU are realized, the UK will experience decreased demand for UK goods and services from Europe due to an increase in trade barriers. Simultaneously, when the UK leaves the EU, they are no longer bound to a common trade tariff with the rest of the world, and could therefore decrease trade barriers with the rest of the world compared to what they are now. Additionally, unpredictability on the financial market will lead to decreased foreign direct investment. Theresa May seems to know a thing or two about international economics, since she is currently stressing the importance to prioritize the formulation of this new regulatory framework. The sooner the sense of security and stability has recovered, the sooner UK can expect foreign direct investment to return to the UK.
I never thought the extent of economics involved with Brexit was this large.
Believe me, if you end up taking the international economics course, you will find out that there is so much more. Think of similar Brexit analyses regarding the labour market or fiscal and monetary policy. See the links below for videos on these topics.